morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to another HRO Today educational podcast. I'm Elliot Clark, the CEO of HRO Today. We publish HRO Today Magazine, HRO Today EMEA, and HRO Today APAC. We're the organizers of the HRO Today Forum, educational conferences held around the world, and we're the managers of the HRO Today Association. Today, we're going to be talking about talent acquisition, and it is a giant problem and a giant headache for everyone worldwide. There are significant issues with labor shortages, and a lot of companies have had to go out and get the help of recruiting organizations and recruitment process outsourcing firms on project or longer-term engagements. The fact that these companies have scrambled to get further assistance is not a sign of their agility in crisis. It actually points to the fact they probably didn't have the right structure in the first place, that their infrastructure could not flex easily. So today we're going to be talking about talent acquisition, infrastructure, and having the proper models to deal with economic ups and downs. Our guest today is Ryan Carfley. Ryan Carfley, and it's great to have Ryan on. He is the CEO and president of Personify. Personify is one of the most highly rated providers in the mid-market, though they have some very large clients as well, on the HRO Today Baker's Dozen customer satisfaction rankings. Ryan joined Personify in 2001, so he's in his 20th anniversary, after a successful career in Division I athletics as both a player and Ryan was a Division I coach. And everyone knows when you're coaching that the best talent wins. So he's been in the talent business or the talent issue all his life. Ryan is also one of the top executives in Research Triangle Park area. So Ryan, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here, Elliot. Thanks for inviting me on. For starters, we do believe that the best talent, or in many instances, the best team wins. But in terms of Personify, we're a next-gen talent access provider in the RPO sector with our North American headquarters, as you mentioned, here in Raleigh-Durham, RTP. Our footprint is global. We're super proud to be named to the Baker's Dozen in each of the last 5 years. And ultimately, we believe we've built one of the only long-term viable solutions to the challenges employers face with hiring variability, cyclicality, and hiring elasticity. We started as a firm 35 years ago as a traditional search firm and expanded into the RPO sector 12 years ago. And I mention that for no other reason than our delivery mechanism, when paired with our deep history in the search business, has proven to be invariable, particularly when servicing labor deplete or highly competitive hiring markets facing variability. We're really, really excited to be here.
That's great. So let's take a step back and look at the macro issues. I referenced them at the beginning of the podcast. So we see a lot of shifting post-pandemic trends in labor markets. And, this goes into a lot of different aspects of HR and talent acquisition. And one of the inevitable questions for companies is, do I have the right hiring model? Many companies are scrambling right now to find talent. You only have to look at the nightly news broadcasts or, mass media news websites to hear all about this talent shortage, great resignation, you name it. And the fact that so many companies, the industry you're in is booming right now with requests for short-term support. And as I said, that suggests they didn't have the right hiring model at the start. Now, I know you guys advise companies on hiring models a great deal. So what are the barriers? And let's talk first about the internal HR department. What are the barriers they have from a capacity or infrastructure perspective to actually demonstrate flexibility when times are changing as they are right now?
Well, I think, Elliot, you call out something that I think is really important right now, and that's that this particular climate has exposed what we believe to be some significant long-term challenges that have existed just in the traditional terrestrial talent acquisition model that we've all worked within over the last 20 years. Many companies take a best guess approach to workforce planning and hiring forecasts. They look at attrition levels, soft spots in the organization, event-driven growth, seasonality, and they set their internal recruitment team's capacity to absorb maybe that plus or some sense of surges throughout the year. The problem with this approach is that hiring needs fluctuate, whether you're coming out of a pandemic or you're just looking at the generalized recruiting challenges that exist. And your workforce plan usually starts to become outdated as we turn the first quarter and we near the midpoint of the year. The reality of the situation is that hiring is a variable and dynamic challenge, and you can't fix a dynamic problem with a fixed solution. This is why we like to say traditional standalone talent acquisition models are largely broken. I think they're very inefficient at times. And so the question starts to become, how do we go about solving this problem? And from our perspective, RPO is an outstanding solution to do it. But there are 4 really critical components that your provider has to address when you start thinking about solving this problem successfully. The first one, when you think about what traditional methodologies lack, comes in its delivery mechanism. Is the delivery mechanism on demand? Do you have the availability to truly keep up with hiring variability and surges that come at the speed of business? Let's face it, we're not ever sitting down, Elliot, as talent providers and getting hey, we're going to add 1,000 people this particular calendar year, and it's going to come in equal installments, 1/12 of which are 83 hires per month. So whether it's a fatal flaw to the workforce plan, whether it's economic cyclicality or event-driven growth, hiring has and always will be variable. Your delivery mechanism has to be variable as well. Secondarily, most traditional search methodologies that are being deployed across talent acquisition departments lack the pure search expertise to pick it up and set it down, to give employers the talent access required to survive. And this is particularly the case when you start thinking about labor deplete or distressed market. This lack of search functionality generally drives up agency spend, leads to a poor voice of customer or elongated hiring process, and many times all of the above. Lastly, the cost model they're operating on is fixed. And when you think about a fixed cost model, this either leaves the TA department under or over-resourced. And when you start thinking about the challenges that come with under-resourcing your talent, your TA department, high agency spend, elongated process. The flip side of being under-resourced is being over-resourced. So when your TA team is over-resourced in a fixed model, ultimately you suffer from the sunk costs of idle recruiters. In both of those instances, it's not set up for the long term. And then what we see more often than not is traditional recruitment methodology is far too reactive to be effective. We got into this space because we felt like there was an opportunity to drive change. And when you start thinking about labor deplete or distressed markets, Personify works very closely with our customers to reposition the thought process or the mindset around talent acquisition into what we call a steady state of recruitment. You've got to be on 24/7, 365, whether it's your talent community, whether it's building a live org chart that functions like you would a depth chart of a sports team. You mentioned our background in athletics, effective succession planning, and then layering that in with a game day experience that mirrors your core values and your EVP. And these are all critical components if you're serious about growing in this environment. And that doesn't even take into consideration that your tech stack has to be on par to survive in this climate. So in short, in order to meet this business need of the climate that we're in right now, you've got to deliver on demand. You've got to have the search chops or the search capabilities to give talent access that is traditionally reserved for third-party search firms. Your cost model has to be variable and fluctuate up and down. And ultimately, you've got to design a program that changes our overall mindset from, have a need, have a guy, got a guy, however you want to phrase it, to something that's totally reactive and pushing it into a more proactive thought process where we're starting to interview for positions long or well ahead of the need. So those are the things that I think are the jump-off points when you start thinking about the challenges that traditional TA models carry.
You make some great points. You did mention terrestrial models, so we're going to do another podcast on extraterrestrial recruiting at some point, Ryan, because I think that's a fascinating topic for us at this point. Jeff Bezos was able to recruit William Shatner to advertise extraterrestrial recruiting, right?
I love it.
So you made some good points about the variable models and things like that, and most internal infrastructures can't do the adaptability in real time. I keep hearing the word agility bandied around, but until they budget in a flexible fashion, and then even the internal teams, for them to be able to flex up without having recruiters on the bench is impossible. It's not like you're going to just decide, well, we need 40 more recruiters and be able to hire them overnight. The internal systems don't operate that way. Clearly, there's limitations to the internal infrastructure. And we really need, in times like this, to recognize that this variability is going to be a long-term, not short-term phenomenon. So the advantages of a variable model are evident. So my question is, let's talk about that, the advantages. Let's talk about how they're best deployed. And also for the buyers in our audience, which is the bulk of our listeners, what they need to know about appraising their upcoming hiring needs, what they need to know about selecting that right partner, okay, and how to maximize that partner's impact. Right, and look, I agree with most everything you just said, because I used to tell clients, I would go in and they would say to me, well, what's your cost per hire? And I'd say far lower than the cost of the unfilled job. And that's one thing that companies don't look at very effectively, is the cost of that unfilled job. But to the extent that they need to go to a company like a Personify, which, as I mentioned, a highly rated provider, there are other ones as well, they need to go to a firm like yours. How do they sort of appraise their need, communicate it to you, because that's important, and also select that right partner and make sure the partner has everything they need to be successful?
So I think there's a lot to that question, Elliot. I think the first thing I'll do is try to tackle the second part, which is what do I need to consider as the jump-off point? What do I need to consider when you think about selecting an RPO provider? So the first consideration I'd make, I think, starts and stops with the cost model. How much of our fee structure, whether it's building your entire team internally or working with a provider, how much of this fee structure is going to be fixed versus variable? If I'm paying either way in a fixed fee model, I certainly want to get a better understanding around what happens in times of hiring surge. It might seem like a bargain, but ultimately the TA team is going to be de-resourced and I'm going to go out the agency 40% of the time, whether it's my own team or using a provider. The reality of the situation is if you take a look at your 3-year run rate as it relates to hiring, you can get a general barometer of what your, call it, normalized headcount needs would be. But if you don't have something that gives you that ability, that burst ability, you ultimately start to get yourself into situations where you've either overspent or you've de-resourced, like we mentioned. And so when I think about variable pricing, what we've designed is something that enables you to finally begin to assign recruiting costs and talent acquisition costs with sourcing strategy and urgency in real time. So that's the first thing I would look at, is if hiring elasticity is a challenge, and it is for most of the organizations we work with, then I need to have something that gives me that ability to flex up and down with my costs in real time. The second component comes with talent access. Is your provider someone that you have to drag along, or are they pulling you forward? And when we start thinking about next-gen talent, the very first thing that we think about comes by way of talent pool construction and digital access. Is your model proactive or reactive? So when you think about what we do when we sit down and build your internal data set, is your ATS going to be a data dump, or is it actually something that becomes a strategic value or weapon to your business? So is your partner going to build a talent pool for you over time that reduces hiring cycle time and cost and also gives you great access to the very best candidates available? And are they building it even when there aren't open recs? Are they looking at that and saying, hey, we've taken a look at your attrition. We know if we're looking up over the horizon, we are going to begin talent pipelining and talent pooling. And in our case, it starts with us in implementation. We will begin pipelining organizationally for what you would consider to be the 20% of the roles that give you 80% of the headaches in our implementation program. We're building the data set, we're validating the information, and we're building the channels that we're going to communicate with those talent pools on. And then another key component would be candidate experience. Is your provider going to deliver a superior candidate experience, one that is either on par with where you are or better than what you can perform? Does the candidate experience during the recruiting process lead someone to converting? Is it a weapon in that process? And then recruitment marketing and your digital component. What expertise does your provider have in recruitment marketing? We have the ability, when you start talking about scaling right now, Elliot, it's not 1 + 1 = 2. It's got to be 1 + 1 = 30. These are exponential times. And so when you think about what digital enables us to do, it enables us to be in multiple concurrent geographies with multiple profiles, with not always leading to adding 4, 5, and 10 human beings, whereas we're using products. So digital footprint's really, really important. The second component of that is that recruitment marketing being done in-house, or is it outsourced? As my outsourcing partner outsourced the recruitment marketing. And we would argue if you've done that, through that game of telephone tag, you lose the very essence of the company's EVP and the ability to really drive the appropriate level of messaging. And then lastly, analytics. And you mentioned this early on in our discussion. When we take a look at enterprise level hiring, does your provider have the ability to break down every individual toll gate of a hiring process, assign timing metrics to each one, and then pinpoint those bottlenecks to begin to highlight, hey, this is a systemic problem, or this is an acute or isolated issue? And when you think about hiring 5,000 people, you might find that the selection toll gate is what drives some of the biggest challenges. We make that adjustment in real time. So one, do you have a leading indicator that tells you the trouble's on the horizon? And then can you adjust in real time to keep up with what we call the speed of business?
You made a lot of great points there. And, one of the things is the difference in mindset. So you look at a Personify as an example of you're essentially a bolted-on infrastructure. Like a bellows effect, you can increase or decrease the number of recruiters. The way you look at managing the process from the analytics to the planning to the use of marketing is very different because for you, you've got to be able to manage very carefully the demand, the number of jobs that you need to fill against the head count, or you begin to seriously hemorrhage financially. Internal teams don't have that same level of risk in terms of adding or detracting people, going to agents or not going to people, going to agencies. So in their fixed model, when it gets urgent, people just start hemorrhaging cash and start spending a fortune on agency fees and things like that. But, in truth, the RPO providers, both projects and long-term engagements, need to be extremely disciplined in applying resources in a different way and also utilizing technology for things like employment marketing, like candidate experience, to be as effective as possible so you're not wasting effort. So it's a very different mindset when you listen to it from providers versus the internal practitioners. I'm not saying they don't know anything about recruiting. They do. They're great at it. But they don't have the same tools available. And now we've discovered that, when you talk about just like planning the process like an athletic event, that you can whiteboard this during a presentation, right, Ryan? You can put X's and O's. Here's your candidates. Here's my recruiters. You can execute plays, right?
Well, there's no question. And you use a word, Elliot, that's central to why we entered the market. When we came into the market in 2008, what we found was organizations would move to an outsourcing program. And we were just a third-party agency at the time. And then that work would find its way right back to us. And we started saying to ourselves, wow, something feels off here. You're outsourcing. You have an internal TA team who's now outsourced a function, and now you're going to go beyond that point to another solution to try to solve this. And what we quickly realized, and you used this word a minute ago, and I think it's important, is when you start to consider risk, we fundamentally believe that it is on the shoulders of the provider to assume the lion's share of the risk for delivery. If a company gets to a point where they want to outsource, the reality of the situation is that we are the expert. So when I think about fixed fees, really, as whether it's building an internal team or what you see with other solutions that are out there, when you start to think about how you're going to consider a provider, I think one thing that I'm glad you've jogged my memory on is the risk appropriately proportioned? Is it a shared risk situation, or has the provider, or maybe are you building an internal team where you are assuming far too much of the financial burden for the outcome? And I think that what you see more often than not is providers try to protect themselves from what you described, right? There might be a surge that comes up here or there. So I want to make sure we have enough funding, but we believe that in a variable model that truly assigns sourcing strategy with urgency and cost, your costs will go up. That enables us with the appropriate level of resources, whether it's tech, tools, programs, or people, and we're expected to keep up with that in real time. And I think that's one of the real advantages to using Personify. And again, we're not the only one in the space that thinks this way, but that's the reason we believe so strongly in variable models. Because that risk, that word you used is a trigger for me, because we, particularly in our second generation RPOs that we work in, the risk was really imbalanced. And we seek to find relationships where it's structured in a capacity that it's mutual. If not, we assume more of than the employer, because that's the reason they're coming to you in the first place.
There's also some of this is attitudinal on the part of companies. They actually have tremendous risk, but they don't have the same proactive attitude toward managing it. I know a lot of companies look at RPO firms and say, well, we don't outsource hiring. And then you ask them, well, what percentage of your hires are filled through agencies? And they say 20%. And my response has always been, well, you do outsource, you just didn't do it in an organized fashion.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
Disorganized versus organized outsourcing, right? You made some great points, Ryan. We'll have to have you back again at some point to talk about these things, and I can hear the passion in your voice. So, I want to thank Ryan Carfley, the CEO of Personify. As I said, Personify is one of the most highly rated providers in the mid-market for recruitment process outsourcing on the HR Today Baker's Dozen. I'm Elliot Clark, CEO of HRO Today, and I want to thank you for your time and attention to this podcast, and we'll look forward to you joining us on a future podcast.